All right, so we want to start?
Ready to go. Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we got Pete Zerger here today. He's going to talk to us about bringing PowerShell to DevOps, and I'll just, without further ado, let him take over. And if y'all have questions, just type them in the chat, and then I'll relay those to Pete and get those answered for y'all.
All right. So, Rick reached out I don't know, a few weeks ago now, and we talked about coming down, and I thought I'd maybe go outside the box a bit. We'd talk about PowerShell in the DevOps context, and I think about this topic just because there was, when I look back in my history, I've written a fair amount of PowerShell, but more and more I'm finding in every organization, there's an expectation that somebody in IT Ops is going to pick up the baton of DevOps and begin to do things. And it's not uncommon that it's PowerShell scripter that's doing it, because if you can write PowerShell, you can more or less go figure out a lot of other things. I'm finding increasingly people that write PowerShell, eventually figure out C#. Myself, I drifted over into Python. I write a fair bit of Bash, so everybody's different. But I thought maybe we could poke around this topic a bit, and I'm less interested in saying here's exactly how you run a script, from a DevOps pipeline. But I want to talk all around this about how you get PowerShell in the nooks and crannies, and really how you try to drive this process, because I've seen how things go when there's nobody to drive DevOps. So I want to get just a bit about your backgrounds here. So I'm going to ask a few questions. So who would say that PowerShell is just one of many things that you do between 9 and 5? I mean, is there anybody where the PowerShell is your entire job, like that's all you're doing? So there's one guy where PowerShell is all you're doing, but you're probably expected to have a lot of context around that and knowledge around the problems you're trying to solve, right?
Yeah, but the 20 years before that was everything.
Like what?
System engineer, most 80% Windows, 20% for all the shops like that.
Nice. So how many of you are using a CICD, like a pipeline on a daily basis? Who's using a lot of Azure DevOps, for example? I'm assuming not many people. Good. Okay, you're my people. You're exactly who I wanted to talk to. And how many of you work with something that's not a Windows server, like IaaS or PaaS cloud workloads, Linux workloads? Anybody? Okay, cool. Yeah, that's good. We're in the you're the right people for this sort of discussion. You're really, when you think about, why do I care about talking about DevOps? At the end of the day, I find that when we throw that DevOps word out there with any company, they're all in some phase of implementing DevOps, and none of them are there. And so I work with a company right now quite a lot that has 4 development teams, and I work with all of them in some capacity. Sometimes we're hands on keyboard, sometimes we're looking at their architecture to see if they've implemented, if they've made the right decisions. So, my job is put my name by this and say it's right, and then I know they're going to crawl off to Microsoft and actually check me, so I have to be careful about that sort of thing. So really what I want to refer to you guys are just some things you can take back to work and potentially show some thought leadership and maybe carve out a nice, interesting role for yourself, bridging that gap between, old school operations, people that aren't really making that leap, and development teams that are maybe feel a little too agile and unwieldy at some times. It's a difficult balance. So just a bit about me. I spend a lot of time consulting with customers. It's about half my job. I'm kind of working on a Microsoft cybersecurity training series with LinkedIn Learning. I'm half a dozen courses in. We just signed some paperwork to do some stuff around security event info management and that sort of thing. I talk at a few conferences. I work at a partner called Lumigate, and the other half of my job, so I talk to customers about DevOps, and to varying degrees, I'm responsible for helping them with that. But the other half of my job is I'm a product owner in an agile development organization. So I've got a development lead that lives in Toronto. I've got offshore developers. We conceived the first AI-powered chatbot that helps manage Microsoft Cloud services. So I have a daily stand up at 8 a.m. every morning. We have some products we work on for the education space. So I'm managing backlogs, I'm managing sprints. I'm talking to customers to see if the features we're building are the right features. And you know, if there are 2 words I live by, it's fail fast. If I want to try something out and make sure it works, I'm going to fail in a week or 2 weeks, not, you know, 2 months or 4 months. It's crazy. I'm helping an org right now take a product to market that they have been working on as of July 1st for 2 years. 2 years. And when I look at that, I can be very judgy. They're very early in their DevOps life, and I could be very judgy and look at their process and say, you know, if you guys would do it my way, we could have done this in half the time. I'm not sure that's true, but I see the challenges of not having of too much manual deployment, of not enough communication when you're having these big 90-minute meetings once a week. Instead of, I meet with my developers for 10 minutes in the morning, and then we have what we call a parking lot. If you've got a problem we need to talk about, then we take that after the 10 minutes. We're done by 8:30 every day, and that way I always know what's going on, and I'm always relaxed, and so it's good. But so everything I'm talking to you about, I promise you I've lived this, and I'm giving you sort of notes from the field. So these are exactly the things I work with. Everything tends to sort of drift around Azure, but this morning we were talking event-driven architecture in PaaS, and I was, you know, testing shell scripts in a pipeline, and I created a service principal with a PowerShell script. So I'm drifting across all of these areas, and security lives everywhere. So DevOps, along with DevOps these days, you're going to hear about DevSecOps, which is really taking thinking about security back into the development, back into your pipeline. And so I'm gonna show you a little something you can do in your pipeline as you're working with code to potentially begin to make sure that your code is secure as you roll out. You know, if you're using PowerShell scripts, if you're borrowing somebody else's PowerShell scripts, if you're using, you know, heaven forbid, you know, community written PowerShell modules, it's never a bad idea to scan code. You know, when we're working with Docker, I love to make sure we scan images, because you never know what people are up to. So let's get the free stuff out of the way so you have to leave. I wrote a book with 4 of my buddies called Inside Azure Management. Let me see if I can hide this little thing. We wrote a book that it's well worth paying for. But you make so little and take so many orders from publishers writing books that we said, let's just hire somebody and do this ourselves. And so that's what we did. And so you can go to that URL or just Google Inside Azure Management. You can get it for free. It's 500-ish pages, 500 and change. Probably a month from now, you'll be able to get a physical copy on Amazon.com if heaven forbid you actually want a physical copy. This is a PDF. You can search it. Have at it. Our compliments. Oh, sorry. Here, go ahead. Go ahead. So the other thing, if you like training, online training, if you need to learn things, my strategy for training in this life is I want the 5-minute version. And then if I can't just go run on my own, I want the 20-minute version. And then if I still need more, I want the 60-minute version. So LinkedIn Learning has about 10,000 courses. And they specialize in courses that I would say are 1 to 3 hours in length, and they're broken up in 5-10-minute increments. So they're really bite-sized. If you drop me an email, I'm going to give you exactly 1 email in return, and it's going to be an activation codes for 90 days of LinkedIn Learning. And I think they're throwing in LinkedIn Premium now for you as well, so you can see what that's all about. But just drop me a line. I'll shoot you a URL, and you just click that URL and go nuts. And if you lose my email address, find me on Twitter. There aren't that many Pete Zergers, and there's actually another Pete Zerger out there, but he doesn't do IT stuff. So I'm easy to find. I've been located by 2 high school girlfriends by accident, looking for software licenses. Well, one of them is friends with my wife now, so I guess I have to smile and say it's a good thing. So, you know, 3 things today, and I want to give you fair warning. So we all like PowerShell, and I like PowerShell. So I wrote the PowerShell chapters for a couple of System Center books. I've written thousands of PowerShell scripts. I've written PowerShell modules that would automate deployment of SQL in System Center. I wrote I banded together with 4 guys and wrote 100 days of PowerShell DevOps, or sorry, PowerShell DSC, when desired state configuration came out. Back in the days when that was excruciating. Not that it's less painful now, but I do want to talk to you all about diversification. So PowerShell has a place, and there are other areas I want to show you that may be, as a PowerShell coder, it's so easy for you to pick up other skills that are high value and highly marketable, that I just want to tell you about that. Because I want to tell you, because there was a time where I was writing little other than PowerShell, and nowadays I'm writing Python, I'm writing shell scripts, Bash, and it varies. So the first point I want to make over the course of the next hour and change is that there's not an executive in this world that cares how cool your PowerShell scripts are. They just want to know, how quick and how inexpensively and how reliably can you get me to making money. That's what it's all about. PowerShell does have a really interesting place in the DevOps world, and with Azure DevOps as a platform, they've actually made a way for us to take some of our PowerShell tools into DevOps, both from a development perspective and for CICD, so continuous integration and delivery. But there are some caveats. So diversification is going to be part of my talk, and don't be put off when I tell you the downsides of things, because I'm just trying to be straight with you in that respect. How many of you use like Visual Studio Code to write your PowerShell these days? If you're not using VSCode, what are you using to write PowerShell? That's fair. I actually use ISE in some of my examples just because my VSCode is dark. It's the dark mode, and so I like the light sometimes. But yeah, so if you're not using VSCode, I would say download VSCode and start using it a little bit. You're not going to see investment in PowerShell ISE. Totally get why you use it, because it is convenient as all get out, right? But with a little bit of work, when we talk about source control, there comes a tipping point where you just want to use VS Code. So VS Code, it's funny, VS Code is the most popular code editor in the world now. And there was an article a couple of months ago talking about the embarrassing amount of VS Code that gets used inside, like Google, for example. Like all of these developers in Google are using VS Code, and nobody wants to talk about it. But I wanted to do something else sort of interesting out here. So GitHub once a year publishes the most popular languages, and they're doing that by check-ins, right? So everybody has their metric. You can look at check-ins, and to be fair, so to give PowerShell a little pump here, last year PowerShell was growing at a rate of like 1.7x. So PowerShell was on the fastest growing list. But if I go back 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was 2016, PowerShell was number 30 on the most popular language list. It's popular, and it's getting more so. But pretty consistently we see, so by their measure, JavaScript is up there. If I look at another measure of popularity, I saw Python was most popular. You see Shell up here, so the Azure CLI, which is very Azure DevOps friendly, is in the top 10. And C# somewhere in the middle. So if we go back 8-9 years ago, C# was the most popular language in the world, and with open source kind of blowing up, the world's changed a little bit. But if you Google most popular languages on GitHub, you'll find blog posts, and once a year they kind of hang this out here for everybody to see. But my favorite DevOps strategy is about the same as my favorite cybersecurity strategy. I like something that allows me to spend a fair amount of my day with a cup of coffee in one hand, which means I'm not pushing too many buttons. I'm not manually deploying a lot, because we find that just doesn't scale all that well. And when you need to service multiple customers and to make sure something works the same way every time, and when something breaks that you can repair it very quickly, that's one of those places where we'll get into some interesting discussions. So there's a free add-in that I'm going to show you, the Pester. I'll point you to the Pester test runner. Is there anybody using Pester in here today? So not many people. Wow. Okay. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Pester is something worth using, and I'll explain why. So I was expecting maybe we'd have some really hardcore PowerShell folks in here that were using Pester every day. I don't enjoy Pester, but it's a tool that's necessary, I find. So, how many of you are using Git repositories to store your source code? So I would say half or so. Okay. I want to have a talk about that, and I want to show you the way here. Okay. So Git is source control. It's distributed source control. What's fantastic about Git. So before I tell you why it's fantastic, let me give you 2 facts. Git is the #1 most widely used source control in the world, bar none. It was written by Linus Torvalds, the man who wrote Linux. And what's great about Git is it works in distributed mode, so we can all be disconnected. We can work offline, and when I reattach, it says, hey, there are some things in the source that you don't have, so why don't you do a fetch and a local merge, and let's work out those differences. Microsoft, while in the bomber era was very resistant to that, they eventually got on board and said, we're going to use Git, we're all in, to the point that the repositories I will show you in Azure DevOps are actually Git repositories. There's no reason to use anything else. Microsoft says this is what we think you should use. If you're using our old school stuff from back in the day, don't. You use Git inside of Azure DevOps. So it's just the industry standard. And here's the nice part, okay? So right at the bottom here, this book from Git, when you go to this address, it's legally free. They put it there by intention at no charge. And to be good enough to get to survive day to day and be pretty comfortable for the first 2 or 3 months of your life, you need to read the first 3 chapters of that book, and everything beyond that is optional. I read the first 3 chapters on a plane a very long time ago, and over however many years, when I needed to deal with a problem, honestly, I Google more than I go back to that book. If I have a problem, I'll Google it and figure it out. But Pro Git, chapters 1 through 3, and then you are working in Git. And I'll wind up showing you a Git. Why don't I just show you a Git client right now? So you can do it. You can certainly use VSCode. So VSCode has snap-ins. I feel like bringing in the deep end of the pool because that is an acquired taste. You have to sort of get comfortable with that. So you want to go to Git, go out to GitHub. You want to get so there's a Git GUI, and there is a Git bash command line. You can use the Git commands you find in that book, or you can come out here. And so, for example, I've got some unstaged changes here. So I can actually scan, and this will go look at my folder, my Git repository. And I created a Git repository in Azure DevOps by just saying, give me a new Git repository. And it said, would you like us to initialize that for you by creating a README? Yes, done. I now have a Git repo. I clone it down here, and I'm good. I'll show you where you find your clone URL, because basically you launch this and clone an existing repository, and you pull it down, and then you can just sync code back and forth. So I've got my unstaged changes here. I'm going to stage those critters, and now I'm going to commit them. So I've got some new, and I have to put a commit comment in here. So new script, and I will hit the commit button. And then my last step is I'm going to push that up to my repository in the cloud, and now I can share it with anybody. I can do whatever. But GitHub.com, since Microsoft acquired them, I was paying them $7 a month because I wanted private repositories. When Microsoft bought it, they said, as long as you've got three collaborators or less, it's free. And I went to the 2 repos where I had more than 3 collaborators, and I found the people that weren't doing anything, and I kicked them off. And took my credit card out. So I use GitHub. I use Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps is free to me more or less. With work. So why not? But if you're using PowerShell and you're not using VS Code, You should use VSCode, and you should look at the PowerShell. There are loads of add-ins for VSCode. There's a PowerShell add-in that gives you a good experience. There's a Git add-in that gives you a good experience. And I'll show you the marketplace where you get those things, and I'll put some guardrails out there for high value on add-ins. Did you have a question?
No.
My peripheral vision is not the best. So of you that are using Git, how many have a code branching strategy where you're using something other than master? Okay, good. Yeah, that's pretty solid advice. And so I'll upload this PDF. I'll upload this in PDF format where you can get it somewhere. And at the end there, if you're not using branching today, or you would like to sort of onboard somebody's branching strategy as you're using Git, because the first step is learn those three. You'll read those 3 chapters, which takes an hour. Then you want a code branching strategy. I've got a code branching strategy that some cat on the internet wrote, and it's pretty simple and pretty widely used, but we're using master, and I've got a develop branch, and I've got feature branches. So when I want to do something new, I break off and we work. If we're working on features, we do those independently. So a special flavor of feature branch would be called a hotfix branch. So if we've got to go do a bug fix, we might break something off and do something really quick. That same group I was talking about before we got on the call today, I wrote them a brief to explain branching, because they weren't using branching, and there's still somebody very high in that org that's working straight out of master. So we know when something goes wrong because we have a build that fails because we got somebody working in master doing stuff, and so that's really tough. So you should strive, if you have a product that's big enough to work on features, you want your branching to be as simple as it needs to be, as it can be, okay? So you don't want to work in master because that's your known good working code, right? So at minimum, you should have a develop branch. And if you have, 2 or 3 or 5 colleagues and none of the work you're doing is overlapping, it's probably okay that you're all in the dev branch. Now, the moment you check something in on that dev branch, they're going to have to do some fetch and local merging, but it's not rocket science, so that's okay. But when you start getting, the more complex you're getting, and the more you're building features into a product or a piece of software, the more likely you're going to get down into feature branches. And in the world of PowerShell, if you're building desired state configs or scripts that are pulling in functions from another PowerShell script, et cetera, you can get into the point where you're stepping on each other, and that's where feature branches are nice. But I've got a link to one that's pretty good, and it's pretty well explained in sort of plain English, which is nice. How many of you are working in like PowerShell DSE or PowerShell workflow or something exotic? So you're doing some of that DSE? You enjoying that? Wow, there's a job for you at Microsoft that is. So what we're seeing with PowerShell DSE is it's fading a little more into the background, and it's the plumbing behind a lot of things you see in Microsoft's services. So like the change tracking feature, you got some DSE happening there. Update management, you got some DSE happening there. It's just not really like upfront and in your face, right? But it's definitely got its role.
It does what it does very, very well.
That's true.
There's some issues that I have with it in terms of the way it does its time.
Yeah. DSE has timing for how often it's going to check and how often it's going to replace. Yeah, no, I totally get you. That's interesting. I wondered if we'd have a DSE person in here. That's cool.
I use it.
DFC can definitely be a little rough when you get down in the guts, for sure.
I feel like I've got a couple
Yeah, I can remember a day or two where I felt like I spent a week with DFC that day, and it's tough. So, and Microsoft has a lot of desired state config modules you can download with samples, right? So, and what I will say with those, if you're going down that road of DFC and you're using those samples, dig down into those modules before you go to production with them, because you will find sometimes holes in there. Like I wanted to roll out I used to work for Cyrus and Software. They did Service Manager. They said, can you build us something to automate the rollout of SQL and Service Manager and all of this stuff? And so I wrote a module that would roll out a SQL 2012 or 2016 cluster using PowerShell DFC. And I got down into the guts of SQL and found that the sample had a note that said, hey, we need to add some air checking here. And that's when I knew it was going to be a long day. But yeah, it's got its place. I'm going to show you some other things, and we're going to talk about, because one of the things about DFC is it's really targeted toward making something always in a consistent state, kind of idempotence of a sort, right? And we'll talk about idempotence or idempotence depending on who you are. But I want to talk to you about just a couple of pieces of Azure DevOps that pertain to you all. I don't want to go crazy with this looking at all the pieces. You can crawl into those other components with your dev teams or as you're interested. But Azure Repos is where you'll find the Git repository that lives in Azure. And what's great about a Git repository, when I walk in the door with a group, and I did this, I walked in with a group that coded in Java, and they used Bitlassian for their Git repositories, and they use Eclipse as their code editor. I said, well, if we're going to use Azure DevOps, I'll make you a deal, and we'll use the Azure CLI. I won't make you do ARM templates or PowerShell. But can we move your Git repositories to Azure? And they said, well, how's it work like? And I said, it works like a Git repository. And I've had 0 complaints out of them. So I would say it really does work like a Git repo. So putting your Git repos there is going to be good. Your CI/CD pipeline, so your build pipeline and your release pipeline, that's Azure Pipelines. Azure Artifacts kind of happens by default. That's where we can pull in deployable modules. So when you get into code testing, there's Azure Test Plan, and then Azure Boards is where you manage your backlog. And you've got an API into Azure DevOps, and I'll show you some other interfaces there. But like, I've got an interface where my customers can go when they have a feature for a piece of software. They can type a feature request and hit a button that automatically appears in my backlog. So Azure DevOps is pretty flexible for automating workflows. Think Microsoft Flow. I actually don't use Microsoft Flow for that, but I use a tool very similar to that allows me to, in a GUI, say connect this over to Azure DevOps so I can get stuff in there automatically. Let's just pop over there and have a quick look. So basically I go to dev.azure.com and I log into Azure DevOps. And you'll see all of those components right here. So I'll go to repos, and I've got something that's fairly simple here where we can start. So here's all the repos. So basically I have a project, a high-level project called Parts Unlimited. This is just a throwaway sample that I deployed through one of their little code samples. And so I can create all the repositories that I need under here so I can store my code. I've got a project right now that's got about 30 Git repositories under it, and I probably work in 2 of them, so couldn't even tell you what all of them do, but allows us to get all our work in one place and kind of handle our CI/CD process right there. So interestingly enough, if I for some reason found that I just really desperately wanted to make a small change here, the right way to do this would be to go over and clone this repository. So you see that default. I've created a Git repository here, and to be fair, all you do is just walk through a wizard, and it says you want to create a repository. Yes, okay, done. It's click next sort of work, but I can see what's going on in here, and if I see that I want to maybe go in and make a comment or something, I can actually hit edit here, and I can edit that right in line, and it'll let me do a commit right here in the interface. I'm really not a fan of that, but it's flexible, it works. Now if I jump down to pipelines, let's look at release pipelines. So checking in your code is going to be fairly simple. I suspect your first foray into this is probably going to be more, since we don't have any pester users in here, your first foray is probably going to be more into release-driven stuff. So I can create a new release pipeline right here. So I'll just create a new one, and you'll see by default it's asking me to pick a template. I'm just going to say put an empty job out there. Big fan of empty job because then I can just go select whatever it is I need. So you'll notice here it says add an artifact. What do they mean by that? What's gonna feed this pipeline? Well, my code's gonna feed this pipeline, right? So I'm gonna hit add an artifact. It's gonna say what kind of artifact am I dealing with? Well, you're dealing with an Azure repo. So you're dealing with a Git repository. And it's gonna want me to pick the project. It's gonna want me to pick the repository. So I'll go to my little PowerShell repository. It's going to ask me to pick the branch. So if I'm code branching, and you know, full disclosure, I'm not here, right? I've got a branch of one. I've got master. So my release pipeline is probably going to be master. I might have another pipeline that like for my develop branch, I'll typically deploy that into staging. So I want staging where we can check to make sure things are crazy, you know, not crazy, and then. You know, beyond that, we might have a dev build, or we might just test locally on our laptops. I find more often than not we're testing locally before we go to, as long as our builds succeed. The first thing we have deploying automatically tends to be that develop branch going into a staging environment where we can run some test automation. So I've said Azure Repos. I pick my master. It creates an alias here for me automatically, so I don't have to, when I'm pathing files, it automatically assumes that I'm picking out of there, and it just takes care of that. So now my Git repository is in my pipeline, and now I can start adding stuff. So you see it added a stage for me. I will explain to you, I will show you why stages are so freaking cool just a little bit later. And it's going to come down to one word, idempotence, and we're going to just have idempotence can be a religious discussion, but we'll get into that. So I have an agent job. So the way this works, Azure DevOps, when you're deploying something, if you're deploying a virtual machine in Azure, if you're deploying some sort of PaaS service, your job has to run on what they call a build agent. That build agent is not some magic in the sky. It is if you're using a Microsoft hosted agent, you have to tell Microsoft what kind of agent is this? Is it Windows? Is it Ubuntu? If my requirements get really interesting, I can actually deploy my own custom agent. And what that would probably be, generally what that will be, is an Azure virtual machine that's running the operating system of your choice with all of the special tools you need to build your code. I don't find that an everyday occurrence, but I found that it was frequent enough. I actually have a release pipeline that will deploy a custom Azure DevOps build agent, where I can specify in the pipeline, here's the software I would like you to load on that agent, and it does it, and it adds it into the right repository, blah, blah, blah. So you should always start with defaults. And if I go over here, if I just hit that agent job, when I just the pipeline, it drops this agent job out here, and you'll notice right over here, the agent pool, hosted via 2017. If I was doing open source stuff or something more interesting, see all the different operating systems I can get there. So I can get into whatever I need to. So that custom build agent I was talking about is actually Ubuntu, because I've got some guys that just do some stupid, interesting stuff. So I just finally said, you know what, I'll have Ubuntu. And if you go populate the script with, right here with all the little install things you want, it'll make you whatever it is your little heart desires. So for the moment, we'd be good with exactly that. And I can get into some things around parallelism and specialized authentication. We'll talk a little bit about service principles and how many of you work with crazy authentication scenarios, service principles, that sort of thing. There's a lot of that, it's a little bit of that. So we'll touch on that briefly. That doesn't sound like a majority case. I'm going to pop out of here. So once you get that first job in there, now I can click to add a task. So over here, I can add a variety of tasks. And if there's not a task that matches my search that I already have installed, it's going to go out to the Visual Studio Marketplace, and it's going to look for tasks that meet my requirements. If I type the word PowerShell as an example, some PowerShell stuff comes up. So there I see I can run a PowerShell script on Linux or Windows or Mac OS. So is anybody using PowerShell on Linux today? Just out of curiosity, yeah. So you can use .NET Core over there. So increasingly, I'm seeing that get interesting. I can run inline script where I can basically feed the whole script into the task. If you're somebody who publishes things to the PowerShell gallery, if you're publishing to the PowerShell gallery, I'm going to guess you've already got your own pipeline set up. But if not, it's dead simple to set up a Git repo in Azure DevOps, and then basically just make that a hands-free process. You can drop your module into there. So you see there's a script analyzer that'll do a little checking for you. But there's quite a variety of things. And we don't have many pester folks in here, which surprised me, frankly, but that's okay. So there are actually 2 pester test modules. So if you decide to explore pester, I'll give you a couple of things, but I'm just, as a first step here, I'm just going to mention there are 2 pester tasks out here. Pester test runner is the one you want, and we'll get into that a little further and a little more about the why a little bit later. It's for running your pester tests. So you can take a pester script and basically it's your pester test runner. So if you want to basically create a build pipeline so you can validate your code along the way. And I've got a good sample for you too around pester testing your ARM templates. So more on that in just a bit. And with these release pipelines, you can create release variables. So let me pop over into just a slightly more finished pipeline, something that can actually run. So here I've got deploying a virtual machine from ARM. I'm going to edit this pipeline, and I'm going to edit this release pipeline and pop in here for just a second. And I've got the same thing I showed you there. I've got a repository hooked up, so that's my artifacts. I've got a stage. This stage actually runs a task called Azure deployment, which will create or update a resource group using an ARM template. So sometimes I find myself mixing ARM and PowerShell. And the first place that comes into play is when I'm deploying from ARM. I can output things into a variable, which I can then pick up with PowerShell and do stuff with. But I can jump into variables here, and you'll notice that, for example, I made resource group a release variable here. I made service principal a variable. So I could put a service principal in there. I put the password in there, and you'll notice that I locked that, right? So I can encrypt my variables in the release pipeline, which means I can create a service principal, and I can stick that sucker in here, and I can go crazy all day long, and I can always know that if I control who has access to release, I always know what's deploying stuff and in what context they're doing it, which means not many people have the credentials for this. And as we move further along, as Microsoft moves further along with managed service identities and so forth, you're going to see that evolving very quickly. The script I used to create service principals, I created about a year ago. At such time that when I did it for a Kubernetes thing, and at such time PowerShell was the only way I could really create a service principal that was exactly what I wanted. So that's just the route we went. So just so we get through everything. So we'll be back in there in a bit, but I want to just, so let's talk about service principal. So I've got a service principal script, and it basically takes 4 parameters. It wants a subscription ID, which is your Azure subscription ID. It wants what I call a subscription tenant ID. So every Azure subscription trusts exactly one Azure Active Directory instance. So an Azure Active Directory instance can have many subscriptions that trust it as its primary source of identity. But your subscription tenant ID is the Azure AD instance that is connected to that subscription. And then I want a service principal name and a service principal password. That's not rocket science. It's exactly what you think it is. And so what this script will do is go out and create a very highly permissioned account that can deploy just nearly anything you want in Azure. So in a managed service scenario or a multi-instance scenario where people are getting dedicated environments, I find that this is really nice because we can just drop a highly permissioned account out there and we can know it's never going to fail. And it's done. I can share if there's anything you see that you want. I don't think there's much that I've got that I wouldn't just share with you freely. So just let me know, and I'll put a Git repo. I'll open the Git repo so you can get to it. And basically, and I'm a big fan of logging because in Azure DevOps, as we're deploying from a release pipeline, I can click into the logs, and if my logs are good, I can go down and see exactly where stuff broke. I have a pipeline right now that is 11 or 12 stages. So it has 11 or 12 fairly significant events, and it deploys things like a Cosmos database and a Postgres database and a Kubernetes cluster and an Azure Key Vault and some weird kinds of storage. And it's today, as of today, has succeeded 94% of the time, including all the times where I go out there and I'm putting new stuff in and it's failing. And it runs. Because if you ask somebody from Microsoft for the strict answer, how do I get idempotence and make something the same every time, they're going to say an ARM template, right? And they're not wrong. That's a very good way to get idempotence. I have 0 ARM templates in that pipeline because I was just dealing with a group that, we're onboarding Azure for the first time. We're onboarding Azure DevOps for the first time. When I looked at them and thought, am I going to make them learn ARM templates? No. Couple of PowerShell guys there, a couple of ton of shell scripters. So everything we've got there is Azure CLI in Bash, or it's PowerShell. That's the only 2 things we're doing, and it succeeds 94% of the time, including all the crap where we've broken it on purpose. So it's very reliable. Period. But notice my logging here today. I logged into this sub. I don't see the service principal, so okay, I'm going to do some stuff. And then it spits it out. It tells me what roles it's added that service principal into, so I know exactly when it's done. And at the end of the day, I'm the only one that knows that password, so I can deal with secure transfer. A lot of times I'm dropping that straight into a release variable through some automation, and so nobody even knows what it is. But this sort of logging in Azure Pipeline is fantastic when you're troubleshooting because you can pop in and do this. I actually run this outside of a pipeline. This is something I kind of pop into ad hoc a lot of times. And that's exactly what it looked like. I think the only thing I changed there was the password when I put that over. So creating a service principal is pretty easy. Well, I think I've shown you enough of it there. That's exactly what it looks like. I'm going to run that. It's going to spit all that out, and then I'm going to have an identity I can use. So I want to talk to you about what is a religious discussion. Okay, so full disclosure, I told you I was going to say a couple of things that you might not like. So if PowerShell was something you loved, if PowerShell was your wife, your girlfriend, and you loved it above all other things, you're not going to like the next thing out of my mouth. Okay. If I am picking something that I use for daily use for deploying things, is in Azure, is PowerShell going to be that thing? The answer is no, or at least it's not going to be the only thing. I'm going to use it for some stuff, but for other things, I'm not going to use it. And so now I'm going to give you a little bit of why. And if you were to ask, Microsoft, their answer would be like good company men, or women, you need to use ARM templates. I would argue with you that you don't need to use ARM templates. Is there anybody in here who can build ARM templates, JSON, massive JSON files out off the top of your head from memory? There's nobody, right? None of us speak JSON as a first language. Many of us can write PowerShell like that. A lot of us can write, and if you write PowerShell, like I write a lot of Azure CLI as well. If you write PowerShell, I can give you a free PDF and you will be writing competent Azure CLI bash scripts in an afternoon. And you will come to appreciate it because it's very easy and it possesses a certain characteristic PowerShell does not. So here is a start. So a few weeks ago, a 3 months ago now, a guy published an article, and his argument was, for daily use, you should be using the Azure CLI. You shouldn't be using ARM templates, and he had a long list of reasons why. And I would actually say, for non-production deployments, I agree with him. If you're a PowerShell guy, use PowerShell. If you're a Bash person, use Azure CLI. And if you stumble across an ARM template that does what you want, use that. When we get to production and we need idempotence, That's where it gets a little wonky. So idempotence or idempotence. Is there anybody in here who knows what that means off the top of your head? We got a guy in the back row. Give me your one sentence definition.
No matter how many times you run that code, you end up with the same result.
That is a perfect definition. Anything to add to that? The same way every time. So if I deploy something and all part of that is already present. If I deploy a virtual machine that has 2 hard drives and 1 NIC and a public IP and a private IP, and I run that ARM template a second time, and it sees that everything that is there, it should nod its head and tap out and move on and say you're good. And if I go delete one thing and I run that again, it should replace, if I go delete the NIC, for example, that ARM template run a second time should go replace the NIC, okay? And so on the surface, that sounds like a perfect world. I will explain to you. I told you I've written a lot of PowerShell DSC, and in the world of ARM templates, we can use what we call the custom script extension. That's the code word for any PowerShell script I want to run on a host. I use the custom script extension, and now I'm shoving PowerShell into virtual machine or whatever that environment is, and I'm running that script inside there. Is my PowerShell script that comes out of that I run by virtue of an ARM custom script extension going to be idempotent? It depends on how I wrote it, right? So that's where idempotence in the ARM world breaks down. Is the more I'm relying on myself, the more it's going to fail, right? So I love ARM templates for idempotence. I love my PowerShell scripts for idempotence a little bit less. One reason I actually appreciate Azure CLI, I've hunted that out there for you a few times, is there are some default variables in Shell that allow me to do if-then sort of, I can run something and there's a variable I can go check that tells me if the last thing I did succeeded or failed. And so I can build my own idempotence kind of homemade. We can do the same sort of thing in PowerShell scripts using if-then logic and test and the test commandlets to go out and test things. I can also do it another way, and I'm going to talk to you about that in Azure DevOps. I'm going to show you how I would do it with PowerShell in a release pipeline. So what I'm saying here, what I want you to take from this, and I want you to notice one little thing. There are 2 things I like about Azure CLI. We could go back and say, PowerShell team, I wish you would do this. With Azure CLI, the create command is idempotent. So if I run az VM create, and I give it the parameter for a VM that already exists, if I do that with PowerShell without doing if then, I might get something nasty back, right? With Azure CLI, it says, hey man, it's there, ready, good. So the create, and if you go out and look, and that guy that put this argument about, you know, not using, that he doesn't use ARM templates every day, he's an Azure MVP or something. He's a sharp dude. He even went so far as to go out and find, somebody at Microsoft mentioned years ago that the CLI was idempotent. He actually went out and found in the documentation where it says the create commands are idempotent. That's pretty cool. I'm here to tell you that there are ways we can kind of fake this. So I just want to point that out, that if we need to create something that's really reliable, ARM is not the only way we can go. We can do it with PowerShell, even if I'm not a PowerShell rocket scientist that writes perfect, you know, I can if-then test sort of functionality. Because user-friendly, yes, I love PowerShell because it's user-friendly. I get annoyed when I ask for help and it says, oh, I need to go download the help. That absolutely enrages me. You don't get that with Azure CLI. When I can stop at any point in a command and I can type -H and hit it, and it shows me exactly here's how that command works. I wish PowerShell help were exactly like that. That it never wanted to download crap. That I didn't have to say -examples or that. I just type one thing -H and I get exactly what a normal human person would want to see to do stuff. So stability. This is a sensitive area. So with any scripting language, a lot of times stability depends on the code modules you're using, right? So So I'm gonna say something sort of controversial here, and it served me very well. I'll tell you how it saved my bacon several times. So in 2016, I think it was 2015 or 16. This is the other thing that I find sort of challenging. I warned you I was going to say a couple of things that are unpopular, but I'm going to give you good reason for why. So somewhere in 2015 or 16, we hit the fourth breaking change in Azure PowerShell modules in 2 years, meaning they were changing commandlets in such a way that existing scripts were going to stop working. As a consultant, that meant customers were going to begin calling. And so when that fourth breaking change hit, I said, you know what, I'm going to be very careful about where I use Azure PowerShell. I may not, I will probably never use it as my first thing again. And if I can avoid using it and I can use PowerShell, but use just, APIs, REST interfaces, etc., I'm just going to do that. And so I think it was maybe the third or fourth breaking change in. Corporately, we got together, my dev lead, everybody said, what do you guys think about this? This is crazy. This is bothering me. And they said, yeah, we're with you. Let's instead of using Azure PowerShell, let's instead not do that, and let's write to the Graph API and other areas, and let's avoid that. So true story, fact, the Azure storage module, when you get down to the basis of Azure storage, when you want to copy files in Azure, if you're using AZ copy or you're using Azure PowerShell, you're using what they call the Azure Data Movement Libraries. Those data movement libraries are DLL and some other stuff that allow you to control the number of threads, the block size, everything you need to do to move a lot of data really, really fast. So if you go copy a big file with the storage module of Azure PowerShell, you'll find AZ copy gets it up there really, really fast. You will find the Azure PowerShell storage module gets it up there kind of slow, and that's because they didn't implement the threading, except in the metadata, which is the only place you actually don't need it. So I hit this where I actually accidentally stumbled onto this was with MyGAS, which is the Azure migration tool. You run a GUI and it spits out a PowerShell migration script. Well, the first time we showed a customer how to use that, they were moving hundreds of VMs. Said, why is it so slow? Go, ferreting into there, and we discovered it's the Azure storage module. And we got to digging and realized, my Lord, it's not using the data movement library. So we actually built automation on top of MyGAS, so they could run MyGAS that would spit out a migration script, and then we would take an ARM template and a PowerShell script is what this thing spit out. It basically spit out a PowerShell script you could run that would deploy an ARM template. And so we wrote a script that would go in there and basically switch it over to using the Azure Data Movement libraries natively. So it could copy the disks at roughly 5 times the speed, give or take. And while we were there, we said, you know what? We gave them a spreadsheet and said, put the stuff you need to do in here. And so we made it do things like migrate them to new key vaults and put the right tags in there for governance and set up site recovery instances. We were able to add like massive amounts of value. It wound up being a really important thing. But there was this one really painful lesson back in the beginning. What's happening here? Oh, sorry, that's my laptop thinking it needs to save energy. So PowerShell is great. Sometimes it comes down to you have a module that's not perfect. And I found, in the Azure modules, we had a breaking change here recently with some renames, but they actually left some things in place. So the Azure RM modules work until the end of 2020. So I'm not telling you not to use the Azure PowerShell modules. I'm telling you to weigh your options and proceed carefully. So another thing I like about Azure CLI is the very first thing I ever did in Azure CLI still works today. There are not breaking changes there. So, and again, I wrote a PowerShell module for a System Center book, for a Hyper-V book. I've written lots of PowerShell scripts. I love it, but I have to be realistic. And so everything has their downside. So Azure CLI is not declarative. ARM templates are not user-friendly. PowerShell is neither of these things. And I would argue, that, not in my chart here, I'd argue that there's nothing that beats PowerShell when it comes to variables, right? We can create variables, and so with shell scripts, you're not doing anything object-oriented. I find with shell scripts, I'm storing a lot of secrets and things out in key vaults, but be that neither here nor there. If you need to work with heavy variables, PowerShell is just, there's nothing better. Deploying a virtual machine in Azure is in PowerShell is dead simple. Deploying a VM in Shell, even in CLI, is even a bit simpler, a bit less code, and it's going to be idempotent. So if the resource group exists, it won't puke. If the VM exists, it won't puke. It's nice. I've had the word about the PowerShell module, so the picture I think sums up that talk there. That's kind of, and I don't want to back out those guys. They do a lot of good work, but I just when you see 4 breaking changes in 2 years, that stands out. That's, you know, there is a brand in my long-term memory that comes into play. So I want to talk about idempotence or idempotence. Perfect definition from my 2 friends in the 3rd and 4th row here. So I can run something, and no matter how many times I run it, it's the same every time. And you guys know with PowerShell, if we do that, we can sort of make that reality by building the right checks, balance to our code. We can do testing to make sure objects exist. I actually, the other day, had a guy building, he was building some demos of Azure policy for a technical talk he was giving to his internal team. And he reached out to me and a cloud solutions architect that lives inside their 4 walls, from a cloud solutions architect from Microsoft, that is. Said, hey, can't get these PowerShell or Azure CLI scripts to work to automatically go update this and then you know, force the policy check. Well, he didn't know Bash very well. He's a PowerShell guy, and in 5 minutes said do this and this, and it's going to work, and it worked. And the PowerShell, the guy never could make it work. And so the cloud solutions architect said, well, it must be a difference in the way, because at the end of the day, everybody's calling the graph, right? They're calling a REST API somewhere. And so he said, it must be a difference in the way they're calling the API. So he said, I'll go do a fiddler, you know, little check in the background, and I'll figure out what it is. Super smart dude. And he did actually figure something out and send it off. My buffers are overrunning too much to even care because it was down in the minutia. But yeah, even with the right balances, he would have had to have gone in and written some homemade stuff because the everyday stuff wasn't working.
I mean, you can get checks and balances if you're relying on assumptions that based on certain. You're good for 3 years, and then someone.
Exactly. It's all about context, right? When you write your if-then statement, your try-catches and everything, you're assuming that certain things are true, and there always comes a time where for some reason something's just not right. Exactly. That's exactly it. But I would say the thing moving into DevOps with PowerShell, I want you to go back to organizations with this as a very strong argument that I can make you something that's in the high 9s reliable in a release pipeline, even if it's not ARM. PowerShell is my skill set. Let me start with PowerShell today. I'll use some ARM, and we will work our way into natively idempotent technologies. But I'm going to give you a way to make it more reliable today, and it's going to be a journey, right? So, there's a picture I hold up. I'm trying to get people to start DevOps. It's got a coffee cup on it, and that coffee cup has one word on it. It says begin, and the slide says never underestimate the value of incremental improvement. Let's just do something that's a little better than before. We don't have to get to ARM templates that are nested and delivering perfect performance every time. Let's put our PowerShell scripts into a Git repository. Let's create a simple release pipeline and start doing some stuff. But I do want to point out that when you guys get out there, you're trying to say deploy a virtual machine in Azure, or you're trying to deploy a Postgres database or an Azure SQL database or whatever, Azure ARM template. sample. If you just go Google Azure ARM template samples, it's impossible to not find the Azure Quick Start template. So this is very cool for two reasons, okay? So number one, what comes up in your search when you search for those samples? 785 templates. You can search them. So let's go look for VM. There's one I like to show off just because it's easy, called VM 101. But of course, it's not going to come up. So let me search for virtual machine. Let me search for what people search for, because 295 templates match my filter. But when I click on this, what it's going to do is take me to the right folder in this giant Git repository. So I'm not saying go down and clone this Git repository, but if you wanted to pull all of these 785 templates down to your local machine, you can totally do that. Like what I tend to do is just do ARM template Azure virtual machine. And this will take me to create a Windows VM from a template in Azure. Bam. So what I'm saying is, if you can get proper idempotence for free, take it, take the win and move on. I'm a big fan of if I can get the win without putting my developers or my ops colleagues out and making them learn something massively new and disruptive. If I can just say, here, we win and you can learn this later, but I got you for now, let's do it. So here I have a JSON template, and this lives out in the repo. And actually, if I go out into the Git repo, I'll find two files. So you see Azure deploy.json. There's actually an Azure deploy.parameters.json. So I'll need those two files. Let's go find that on Git, though. Let me back up here. So in your Google search, you should see a link out to the Git repo. Here we go. So here's that same template out in the Git repository. So I want to show you something very cool about that repository, okay? So if you're not in the mood, before I go put this into a release pipeline, there's one simple test I'm going to do first, okay? What do we know about samples? They're not all equally functional, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is go find this template out in that giant Git repository. So there it is, by the way. If you click on that and then click clone, you can bring all 785 down. Don't bother, because there are people at Microsoft updating these all the time. So you always want to be searching and getting the working ones. But if I scroll down here, this is what's fantastic. I can click deploy to Azure, and what this will do is pop up in my Azure subscription. It will take me to the parameters page and say complete the parameters. I will deploy. If this deploys for me, I'm going to take this sucker and I'll put this in a pipeline. And then what's great about ARM templates is ARM templates have a section where I can pass outputs. And in a release pipeline, I can pass an output from an ARM template into a variable that is the perfect thing for me to pass into a PowerShell script to do stuff with. If I have a variable, and that's a place where I love PowerShell. PowerShell is great with variables. They're object oriented. I can type them, etc. I don't have all that control in Bash or certain other areas. So let me just I'll authenticate. I'll take this out to the end. But you know what I'm arguing for here is a pragmatic approach. So what this drops me into, if I were to go straight to the Azure portal and go to all services and search, if I searched for template deployment, it would take me to a screen where I could paste that template and paste the parameters and then fill them out. And so you see here, it basically gives me some settings. So it wants me to pick a resource group. It says, hey, you can edit the parameters if you want. I actually don't want. I can edit the template. And I actually have that template down here, right here, in Visual Studio Code. So once upon a time, Microsoft was building visual ARM template creation in Visual Studio. And about 2 years ago, they stopped investing in that area. and now they have kind of a friendly-ish ARM template authoring in Visual Studio Code. I tend to start with somebody else's samples because I don't want to use them enough to be really, really good at it. But Visual Studio Code said you should use this because there are addins out in the Visual Studio marketplace that are fantastic. One of the things I found I'm always doing when I'm building templates is I start messing with the parameters, because I go over to the Azure deploy.parameters.json and I start messing with stuff that I want to change. Invariably, I break it, and then I have to go get the parameters again and paste it in there. And one day I accidentally came across something very, very cool. So I'm going to close this parameters file. I found an add-in for Visual Studio right down at the bottom here, generate parameters file. So it will create your Azure deploy.parameters.json by simply looking at your JSON file. It's fantastic. So bam, now I have a fully functional parameters file all over again, even though I screwed it up. So just one of many, many, many great links out there. You notice how the type of file I have open has an icon. I apologize. Let me get Zoom it open. I don't know if any of you have my vision. I have old people vision. I have progressive lenses here. I got into my 40s, and my vision got a little better. And my doctor said, "Yeah, quit bragging. That's what happens in your 40s." She said, "You can see some things better, but others you can't." And I found that I could see further away better, but I could no longer wear my glasses and read and watch television at the same time. So here we go, up top there. You see those little icons? Now each has a file type. There's actually a little file type icons add in for Visual Studio that has like dozens and dozens. And so any kind of file I open here, it gives it an icon, so I know exactly what I'm messing with. Because who writes Markdown in here? Oh wow, okay. We're going to talk about, that's the other, he's shaking his head at me. What's your name? Eric shaking his head at me, so I hear you. So Markdown is becoming, I want to say almost ubiquitous. So more and more I'm finding people write documentation in Markdown, and every Git repository has Markdown at its core. It's got something in there that's in Markdown. All right, I'm gonna save this detour for later. So remind me to show you the coolest thing ever with Markdown. I'm gonna change Eric's mind. I'm gonna get him on my team here. So back to our release pipeline, right? So what I did, as I said, I wanted to deploy an Azure virtual machine. I've got Azure PowerShell scripts that will do that. Microsoft's given me ARM templates that will do that with idempotence. So let's look at an ARM template briefly, okay? So if I can take a template that gives me high reliability and I can use that and I can couple it with my PowerShell, I'm going to do that. So what I did here was a pipeline. I dropped a PowerShell. I dropped a repo in here with that ARM template, with that 101 virtual machine thing. I have exactly one task in here. So this is an Azure deployment task, and I want to show you just how cool building your visual pipeline is, because it allows me to pick my Azure subscription, so I can pick from all kinds of stuff, and that's got some of my production subs there, so I can go out here and browse and do my chatbot stuff or whatever I want. So I'm connected to one of my freebie subs, and the action I picked. Look at this. I can tell it what kind of thing I'm about to do. So I'm going to create or update a resource group, which means I can effectively deploy anything that's in this template. But you see things like restarting virtual machines and so forth. I'm getting a lot of functionality in here potentially for free, so I should just take that. So I'm creating or updating a resource group. The template here, I'll browse to this. Okay, I just hit this and browse out to my Git repository where the template lives. And I selected that file, the JSON file. And by the way, when you select the Azure Deploy JSON, it assumes you have parameters there automatically. It looks for it. And you see there automatically what it did was it dropped the deploy parameters in there. But I want to show you what I did. That template, I have a variable in that template called, I'm just going to scroll all the way to the bottom. At the bottom, you see deployment outputs. Exactly what I want to do is if I'm creating a virtual machine and maybe I want to grab that machine's name and the connection info so I can pass that off to somebody, I can stick it in a variable. I can pick that up with PowerShell and do some stuff. So it becomes a mechanism to do some cool things. So what would I do as my next task? And if I wanted to pick that variable up, well, I could go out here and I could look for PowerShell. And you know, they actually have an Azure PowerShell module, so I could run Azure PowerShell modules out here directly. I can run PowerShell on the target machine, so I can actually bring a virtual machine up, and then I can run a PowerShell script on that virtual machine as my next step to deploy stuff, right? So PowerShell instantly becomes valuable because I can drop stuff in there and deploy. Who in here writes automation stuff? Azure Functions, for example. Does anybody do PowerShell functions? Who's using Azure Automations? Azure Automation. So you guys are really writing just core PowerShell. So if you're writing Azure PowerShell, since nobody in this room seems to be using Azure Automation or Azure Functions, totally invite you to start with Azure Functions. And the reason why is Azure Automation, when you schedule with both of these, they have a powerful scheduling capability. With Azure Automation, it schedules in 1-minute increments. And what that means is you're burning your execution time 1 minute at a time. I can burn up what I get by default very, very quickly. On Azure Functions, you get something like 1 million execution units. So I've got a friend of mine that lives in Australia, and he writes functions all the time. It's what he's doing 5 days a week, 12 months out of the year. He was bragging at a conference down there. He said, I have used $2.75 of my own money writing Azure Functions in total since I first started using it X number of years ago. So if you're a PowerShell scripter, if you want to deliver high value to your development organization in Azure, look at Azure Functions because it's very PowerShell friendly. It's very flexible. And by the way, there is an invoke Azure function task you can go get from the, let me see if I can find it right quick. There's an Azure function task I can add in here to build functions, but there's one that I can use. I don't see it here right off. It's called invoke Azure function, but I can actually invoke an Azure function from a release pipeline. So you can take your PowerShell to the next level just using either these native commandlets to go get these things, or going just a step further and doing that. So let's run PowerShell on target machine and just look at this. So any of these, you see it's going to give you machines. So I can pass the value from a release variable in here. And passing release variables, I'm going to show you the release variable syntax because it's stupid simple. So actually, let me go to a crazy complex release pipeline and show you something really big. All right, here's something I know will have a lot of variables in it. I want to show you something that's kind of on the complex end. And I want to show you how release variables work. So all right, so this is one that deploys an entire Kubernetes cluster. It does some stuff. So I've got a bunch of variables out here. So you see that a lot of those have values, etc. I'm doing it with a shell script. So what I do, and this works for variables anywhere you use them in Azure CLI. So I take the variable name, like Azure.location, for example. And now I'll go to my pipeline, and I'll go to my script. It has a parameter. And what I do in my scripts is when I parameterize my script, I'll parameterize them with like a dash and a word, but I'll also parameterize them with a dash and a letter so I can be a little more succinct. And so my dash letter, my script parameter needs a value. So this can be a PowerShell script, shell script, whatever you like. and I simply, you see Azure.location right there, right? So all I did was wrote a parameter in my script, PowerShell or otherwise, to take location, and I do $ and then bracket, and I put that release variable in there. That's the syntax. It's pretty well documented out there in the world, but once you do this a couple of times, you never forget it. It's dead simple. You'll notice that there is a system default working directory up there, and then it automatically picked up my alias of my Git repository. So pretty much my default value is good because you see the ellipsis out there. Again, I'm browsing out to the script. So you can browse to your PowerShell script, browse to whatever it is you're working with. I find that the default options down here tend to be just fine. I can add some environment variables if there are some values that they need to inject. I can add environment variables here, and I can get into output variables. So again, I can just have a variable here where I pass some stuff that I can pick up later down my pipeline. It's fabulous if I want to do.
So like some VM or something, you could output like whatever.
Yeah, like send it whatever you wanted. You could throw it in. You could feed it into another script. You could put it into an email task. You could trigger a webhook to go write it to your to a service desk ticket. What did you have in mind? What are you thinking about? Sounds like your wheels might be turning.
Well, we don't have anything in Azure, but we got a couple of companies who are wired and stuff like that.
Oh wow. Okay.
For loss, that you know the companies out of
Oh.
if you move into Azure, you could extend it.
Yeah.
So that's
That's a really good idea, and so two things about that. So you've uncovered something. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, we got Eric and Eric. All right, it's the Eric show. So Eric, so I don't know if he's the good or the bad Eric. Maybe they're both good Erics, but usually there's an evil twin. So just as I said, your build agent, I said your build agent is a virtual machine in Azure, and Microsoft can host your build agent, or you can have a custom build agent. You can do build agents on-prem as well if you like, by the way. So you can totally take this and crawl on-prem. And if I haven't said that before, I apologize. You can easily take this on-prem and use your build agents down there to do anything you want on your site. Which means that if you're working with Hyper-V, VMware, etc., that's when your PowerShell becomes excessively powerful because now you've already written all this stuff to do other things. So now you've got a really good option. And you could, truth be told, you could probably go the Azure automation route and put a hybrid runbook worker down there. What I do like about looking at Azure DevOps is it allows me to sort of connect with my developers a little more directly and kind of get my whole organization thinking about source code. I mean, if I can get my entire ops team to drop their code into a Git repo, I've got a big win now because now we know where everybody's code is because it's in Git, right? That's the most fundamental problem it solves. But the other thing it does is it sort of takes us on that next step towards continuous integration and delivery and not breaking our own scripts. Who in here has not ever broken one of their own scripts and saved over their changes? But a dollar for every time, I would have several dollars. That's one of the fabulous things about. I could probably buy a plane ticket somewhere, but and that's the great thing about Git is I can always go back in my history and I can find that release somewhere back in time where I had something that wasn't broken, and so that's what's really important. So that simple release pipeline I was looking at right there. So my goal was to put something out there that was working, so I could talk about how you work your PowerShell into this. Your goal shouldn't be to write PowerShell to do everything. Your goal should be to scoop up the free stuff, if it's PowerShell, if it's ARM, whatever, and then take your PowerShell, muscle and integrate it into this. So you've got some nice synergy there. So I actually deployed that pipeline a bit earlier. So you see my release history every time I try to deploy something. It shows up. So here was a successful release. It was already out there. So in the world of idempotence, I was talking about idempotence in action, right? So what I could do is go out here and look at the stuff that was deployed in that resource group. So let me just go find that right quick. So here's my Austin Posh group. And there it is. So let me just go delete. I'll go delete the nick if it'll let me. Let me delete the nick, please. So if I delete this, in the world of idempotence, if I go run that pipeline again, it should replace the nick that I got rid of. Where the rails come off that idempotence equation is exactly what the second Eric to speak up said, is if I have circumstances that I'm assuming to be true that aren't, I can have problems. And especially when I'm using, there are many extensions you can add to ARM templates. Custom script extension is my favorite because it's where when nothing else works, I can just shove a script in there to do something. And usually that's a PowerShell script. So let me see if it stopped me. Yeah, see, it actually doesn't want to let me delete that interface because it's in use. So what I can do though, let's just go look at that. I'll go look at this again.
How does it add additional? Will we take it away?
That's a great question, man. All right, so you said it. So it depends. So the question was for you, those of you online, what if I go add an additional NIC to that virtual machine? It depends on where you add it. So if I went out in the portal and I added a second NIC, and so I had 2 NICs in the portal, but my ARM template says there's only 1 NIC, I can, through my release, I can control the behavior. So let me show you. Whoops, I'm in the wrong spot here. When I scroll down here, there's a spot where I can control the deployment mode. And this is one of those like little known things. Well, I didn't even intend to mention it, but you just, it's almost as though I paid you to say this. I can control everything. So if deployment mode, if I pick complete, if somebody did something extra out there in the portal that added stuff that's not supposed to be there, I can make this template behave in such a way, this release pipeline behave in such a way that it will make the extra stuff in that resource group go away. Very cool. So I said it's incremental because I assume nobody's going to go to the portal, and because going to the portal and adding stuff, that takes effort, and people are lazy. So they're not gonna do anything that. So I'm just gonna drop those changes. But what I could do, since this is idempotent, I can go create a release, and I can run this critter just default values here. And in absence of anything else, it should just go out there, see that everything already exists, and say, you know what, have a nice day. I'm done, and it will succeed, but it actually won't create anything because everything's created. So I want to talk about how would I do that with PowerShell. So let's say I've got something fairly complex that I want to do with PowerShell. We can create stages in a deployment. So again, I'm going to go to another release pipeline, and I want to go find something a little more exotic here that's got some more moving parts. So bear with me. It does. So this group that I'm working with, it was 100% open source. They were using Java, Eclipse as their editor, and Maven for their builds. Their ops guy in the DevOps team is a Jenkins guru, and he hated me for the first 30 days. And now we send each other's wives flowers on their birthday. So he's glad to. It wasn't more than 2 weeks ago, we were doing something in Azure DevOps, and he said, in Jenkins, this would have taken me weeks. Yeah. So see stages here? I can add a new stage. And so I just added another stage. And so I'm just going to say put an empty job in there. I pretty much always put an empty job in here. Now with this stage, I can tell this stage what its prerequisite is. So what I can do is say, okay, stage, you need to run after this other stage. And so now what I can do is control the order of execution by taking all the code I've ever written in all my life and I can simply stage it out. If I've got a mistake, the mistake happens in a box, right? It happens in a stage. So basically, I'm saying stage, that this new stage I built doesn't execute unless the stage before it succeeds. And you'll actually notice that it gives me some options in stages. It gives me the option to make this stage execute even if previous stages only partially succeeded. I can get very creative with this. But stages allow me to kind of begin to build idempotence on my own, because I can build, if I can build a little if-then logic into my little PowerShell scripts, and I can be modular about this, I can fail fast and small, so my blast radius is kind of limited. I don't want to build a script that deploys you know, a bunch of storage and a key vault. And let me find, bear with me here. I've got a script that does all of these things. Yeah, so I'm a victim of, here it is. I think this is the one. I've got one that has a bunch of stages in here. I want to show you state like serious stages. I've got something in here that will do it. Here we go. All right, that's what I'm talking about. Here, stage, all right? So this deploys a Kubernetes cluster. So it actually deploys a cluster of all the storage, and this one is not my most granular version. This actually deploys a key vault and a few other things as well to store my secrets. And then it goes on after Kubernetes is in place. It deploys a Kubernetes dashboard. It deploys Prometheus, which is the default monitoring for Kubernetes. It has a stage to deploy what we call a node exporter, which actually exports monitoring data from specific components. It goes all the way out to Grafana, some visualization. It's deploying a Postgres database, a Mongo database, some storage, some more, and then it's actually sending me an email and say, all that stuff's done. Here's how you connect to it, blah, blah, blah. Have a nice day. This will run perfectly every time. And if I go delete the key vault, for example, and I go run this all over again, it will get to where the key vault is, and it will pick it up, and it will run it perfectly because I've staged it out so it works that way. This isn't even actually the perfect end result. There are 2 times out of 100 where somebody will do something weird and they'll say, hey, why isn't this working? And they'll read back to me what they did. And I'm like, okay, you deleted this and this. Sometimes they will delete the right 2 things in the environment because they're trying to rewrite them. And something fails because I'm trying to go find something that no longer exists. But I'm here to tell you that staging in this is magic. So what we can create in the release management world, I'm going, okay, we're still good on time. I love the fact that you did this for 2 hours and not 60 minutes, because we can't really talk in 60 minutes. You're like racing to the finish line, right? So what we can do in here is we can create what we call approval gates or quality gates. So I was doing something pretty simple here, which is just don't run this stage unless the one before it, you know, deployed successfully, because if it didn't, there's something wrong and I might as well go fix it now. But you'll notice right down here at the bottom I clicked on that little funky icon, that same place where I was looking at the prerequisites. There's a bunch of really cool stuff here. You notice I can deploy something after release, after a stage. I can actually make a stage manual. Sometimes I'll make a stage manual which just breaks it out of the chain altogether. So I have a chain where my stages are linked. Like I was doing something with Mongo with Cosmos in here, which has a Mongo interface. We were still using old school IaaS Cosmos or old school IaaS Mongo. So I dropped Cosmos out of my pipeline and said, that's manual. We'll get to it when we get to it. So I can do that. I can take pieces of this and it'll just sit down there. And the piece of the release I'm done with will run automated successfully every time. And when I'm ready to integrate that other piece, I'll bring it in. So I don't have to be done the first day. But back to what I wanted to show you. Right down at the bottom, what we call approval gates and what we call quality gates, okay? So deployment approvals. I can select users who can approve or reject deployment. So in production, you know, what I'm doing is my code is being promoted through the branches, right? So when a build gets promoted from release or from development to release, it becomes, you know, part of that master branch that can potentially trigger a release to production. And so if I don't want prod rolling out right away, depending on how I'm doing that, I can put an approval gate in here to say, yeah, we're ready for this, or maybe no, we're not. I can also put gates in here to evaluate things before deployment. And I can start putting things in here that I would like to do to go check those quality gates. Like I can even invoke a REST API. So that means I can go trigger an Azure, I can trigger an Azure function, I can go trigger a REST API on a service desk ticket. Maybe somewhere in this release pipeline, I'm picking up a service desk ticket, and my quality gate is I want to make sure that the ticket they say is logged actually exists. I can totally do that. I can automate my quality gates. Very, very cool. And if I can trigger an Azure function, I can go stick a PowerShell script in an Azure function to do whatever it is I need to do to call this good enough. So just saying, you've got plenty of place. There's so many opportunities to use your PowerShell. All right, getting back to it here. So those are templates, they're idempotent, they're declarative, they're reusable, and there's lots of samples out there. The challenge is they're just not super simple. So, you know, the reason I care about idempotence is I want something to be easily fixable. So if something gets broken in my environment, I want to be able to go push that. I want to have the sort of life buoy that gets me back to production readiness very quickly. So like in my Docker environment, I actually have it set up. My Docker environment's more than a Docker environment. I have containers. I have database servers outside that. I have applications running. I've actually decided not only to treat my containers as cattle, but I treat my Kubernetes cluster as cattle. So if Kubernetes gets wonky, if somebody's messed it up, I actually have a button. I have a release pipeline in Azure DevOps that will destroy the Kubernetes cluster. It will keep all of my persistent data, my monitoring data, my databases, blah, blah, blah. And then I go hit my release pipeline again and say, deploy Kubernetes, my applications, all my stuff. And it's idempotent. It goes out there with a combination of PowerShell and Azure CLI and gets me back to stuff in 23 or 4 minutes every time. So that's why I care about idempotence. I'm just here to tell you there's more than one way to get to very reliable, and it allows you to reuse a lot of the PowerShell that you have today. But the limits of it come down to our code, right? So when we start getting into PowerShell scripts or anything else, how good our error checking is and our testing is are going to help. So that's what I call homegrown idempotence. So as you're testing PowerShell scripts or ARM templates, I would actually say you can test them both the same way. You can use Pester. So Pester is tailor-made for doing what we call behavioral-driven development. So there are kind of two schools of development. There's test-driven development and behavior-driven development. So test-driven development is where I literally write a small test plan, my test criteria, and I have my criteria written down in a few lines, and then I write my code until it passes these tests. More often I see people using behavior-driven development where we're writing things to achieve an end, and we write different tests in tools like Selenium or Pester to make sure that our code is functional, that it's secure, and at the end of the day, we get something that runs through all of our integration and smoke tests and sanity tests and whatever kind of tests that we're running to make sure that it actually works. I don't like to use PowerShell, just plain old PowerShell for testing. Pester was written to test stuff, so use it for that. You can test your ARM templates in Pester, and Pester's PowerShellish, right? That's what it is. It's basically what you're dealing with there. So you can test ARM templates with PowerShell, and I'm going to tell you how I would do that. So there's two pieces to it. So first, I showed you there's a Pester test runner, right? So we'll go back to that Parts Unlimited. We'll go back to this sample dude. Bum, bum, bum. This is the last piece for, especially for you folks that are already using Git and you're already really using a lot of development tools like VSCode. Pester's like a very logical next step for you. So when I get in here, I can, let's go back into that task. So I could add another task here, and I could add Pester. Just make sure you get the Pester test runner from Black Marble. This one works. It's pretty darn good. And all the sort of confirmation you need of that is I've got a script linked out here I'm going to share with you. It's written by a guy named Tao Yang. He's my favorite Aussie. He was actually born in China. He's a good friend of mine. I go down to Australia and we hang out with his family about once a year, whether they want to see us or not. But Tao is a great coder. He wrote on that book with me. See the link there. But Tao is a great coder, and he was working with the bank, and he needed him to write some Pester testing for ARM templates, because the thing about ARM templates is they're JSON, except they're not totally JSON. They have some custom elements in there. So if you go try to just use pure JSON validation to test an ARM template, it will implode. It's not going to work because they're custom pieces that just don't exist. So Pester testing works with ARM, and what you have here is a script. It's PowerShell, but it's if you look at it, it's 242 lines long, and it's highly parameterized. But Tao shows you step by step. Here's how you get this into your Azure DevOps pipeline, and he says, by the way, go get test runner for Black Marble. I actually, the first time I was looking for this, I'm like, hey, have you ever used this Black Marble thing? And he's like, oh, I need to go publish that that thing. and he actually at the top of the article mentioned, yeah, the bank wouldn't let me take the scripts I wrote out, so I had to redo this. And he said, so it's better. But yeah, so you've got some testing capability. You want to unpack Pester. I found that people who are not probably nearly as experienced or skilled as many of you are with PowerShell. I bumped into a guy at an event about 2 months ago who was using PowerShell for less than 4 weeks, and he went from his first time ever touching PowerShell to actually contributing to the Pester community in 4 weeks, because he needed to do things that nobody had written for him. So he said, if I'm going to write Pester tests, I'll just share them with people. So it's not rocket science, but it's very powerful as a tool, and you've got an activity that somebody wrote that you can put in there. So before we get away from that, I want to just touch on the Visual Studio Marketplace quickly here. And I want to point out all of the very cool things you can find here. And I want to give you some kind of guardrails for, what are my criteria for taking something from the Visual Studio Marketplace and using it or not using it. So what you're going to notice here is really obvious, right? It's kind of like shopping on Amazon for add-ins. So you notice every one of these has some stars, and it shows you how many downloads. So I'm looking for 4 stars or better, and I'm looking for hopefully thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of downloads. Sometimes that Pester task, it's got hundreds or low thousands. But it's the best that's out there. So I'm like, you know what? Okay, that's what I've got. What I got to work with. So okay. But anything you want to search for, you can look at those requirements, but also look at the top with me here. You'll notice that I can pick what I'm searching for add-ins for. So for VSCode, I can go search for things specifically for Visual Studio Code. And I think this is how I found that icon extension. Yeah, there it is. So to get those cool icons in VS Code, I'm a visual person and I like to know what the file has in it. So whether I'm working with Markdown or JavaScript or PowerShell or ARM templates or insert whatever the heck it is here, it has an icon for everything. It's very cool. Markdown. So for those of you that resist Markdown is the native language people use with Git. More and more I'm seeing people using it for blogs. There are people in this world that host blogs that are actually written in Markdown. And for VS Code, if you're storing your PowerShell scripts, you've got to write documentation, right? There's always somebody that wants you to document your code. So let me just quick run out here. Yeah, you're seeing like 1/100th of my clip art library there, my stock photo library. If there were a contest for stock photos, I don't know that I would be champion of the world, but I would certainly be in the finals. So what's that? Oh, absolutely not. There are roughly 20 repositories in this world of free of free photos and so forth, and several of them are attribution free. Okay, so here I have a Markdown file, so I'm going to show you Markdown. And what you're going to notice, okay, so writing Markdown is something like writing in a special language. So Markdown, for example, header 1 in Markdown is the pound sign with a space after it. So look over there. So I have, if you go search that Visual Studio Marketplace, there is an add-in called Markdown Preview. There's another one called Markdown Link. So as you're working with your Markdown, it says, hey, you're not doing it right here, and it'll point out your mistakes automatically. And then another thing, there's always a boss somewhere that says, hey, I need that documentation. Here's the other magic add-in, okay? I can take that Markdown, I can preview it over here to make sure my documentation's good, export to PDF. And it comes out to a perfectly formatted PDF, so the CIO can see the documentation in a format that he understands. It's fantastic. So, Eric, I want you to write some Markdown and basically go out, and all you have to do is Google Markdown cheat sheet in the takeaway that you'll be able to get. And all you'll have to do is I'll send Rick over the PDF here, and he can attach it to the meeting. So bear with me. It may be the weekend before it shows up because I've got some crazy deadlines I've got to go deal with tomorrow. I just really coming here to see you guys today was the break I needed. But anything you want to search for, just go out here and you'll find that Microsoft has added for PowerShell, for Azure Functions, for Kubernetes. Docker has an add-in if you're a Docker person. There's Markdown stuff. What I will say is when you get into like the Git integration and so forth, and even some of the Microsoft add-ins, they look like they were made as kind of a checkbox for somebody. There are a couple of Microsoft add-ins from Microsoft that have like 2.5 stars. So don't feel bad about going and getting some third party that works better. So if I just search for Azure, I'm just gonna real quick. Yeah, so most of them are looking pretty good here. Azure Storage has 3 stars. Yeah, so the moment I tell you that, there's one for, I think the one for Azure DevOps was the one I was complaining about. There was one, oh, Azure Repos, there it was. The Azure Repos one has 2 stars. So do yourself a favor, just go get one of the 5-star Git add-ins and have a nice day. Or use, I really like that visual Git add-in because it's nice. You don't have to mess with command line. I mess with command line a lot because when I develop on Windows 10, I don't use the Linux subsystem for Windows. I can actually quick deploy a Linux VM on Windows with like 10 clicks because they actually added that into Windows 10 now. So I just deploy a proper VM. You know, have a nice day. But lots of add-ins here to make this very, very easy for you. Now, I want to just talk security for just a minute. So DevSecOps is something we're getting into, and you want to have a layered defense for cybersecurity. So the same goes for your code. So when I'm coding, I want my developer workstations to have the basics, right? They're running antivirus, that kind of business. I want to make sure that I'm never deploying anything to production except from an automated delivery pipeline. I'm even a little skittish about things being deployed into other environments like into staging because that's not disconnected. We do keep a couple of sort of I'd call them sandboxed development environment where it's kind of throwaway environments. So if you're doing something stupid, do it in there because we've got it sandboxed so it can't get to, there's no route to any of our other Azure properties and you can't get back to because our team is entirely virtual. We can't even pollute one another. You want to, the whole idea of SecOps is you want to take your scripts that you're writing and so forth, and you want to start examining those for quality. So you saw there's a PowerShell analyzer out there that will look at some of your scripts in your Git repos. There is a DevSecOps toolkit from Microsoft you can use to do some code level scanning in your build pipelines. You want to make sure your environments are just really similar. I try to treat everything I can treat as cattle. So like, for example, I want to be resilient to anything. So in here, I know, and I'm going to show you a bit of magic on this in just a bit. I'm going to show you how I could take my release pipeline, and when you create your release pipelines for the first time, it will invite you to save that release pipeline as a YAML file into a repository. It does that automatically with your build pipeline, but what I can do with the release pipeline is I can export it as YAML and import it somewhere else to create an identical pipeline for, say, staging or development or whatever, right? So I want to try to make my environment the same, and Microsoft's investing a lot of effort into making that YAML, those YAML definitions for the release pipelines and for their build pipelines, highly reusable in that respect. And as you saw, I can create those stages to set up some idempotence, even when I'm taking an incremental step and I'm using code and I'm not using ARM templates per se. Here's something I just wanted to point out as free. So if you want to go do some good like OWASP code level scanning, and I need your PowerShell, your Java, your C#, your insert language here, SonarCube makes something called Sonar Cloud, which costs something, but SonarCube is a task I can add into my DevOps pipeline, and all I need is a free SonarCube instance running. And what it is a very simple service that needs a Postgres database running on it. So you can basically deploy a virtual machine running Postgres, which I can do out of the Azure Marketplace. I can do it on Hyper-V if I can hit click next. I mean, anybody can deploy Postgres. It's just, another flavor of SQL, right? And I say they support Postgres, and I'm actually kind of a fan of Postgres because Microsoft supports it, and it is the fastest growing relational database right now. Its usage has spiked, but SonarCube gives you a free option. You basically, and so you could use this on-prem, okay? So point being, you could do this somewhere. You get it into your release pipeline, and what it is, to be perfectly clear, it is a static code scanner, right? So it's going to scan whatever you put out there. It's not executing your code. This isn't run level testing. It's not doing that, but this is a layer. If you're running containers, you should probably invest in some security software, especially if you're running other people's container images. You should pull those into your repo. Make your changes, check them into your container registry, and you should have something scanning your containers to make sure that they're clean. There are lots of tools that'll do that out there. Rapid7 is one that comes to mind, and they've got some stuff. If you subscribe to them, you can plug in. But I love this one that if somebody says, hey, we need to be scanning our code, great. Go figure this out. And if anybody in this room or on this call goes out and tries to get SonarCube running and you get stuck, drop me a line. I'll throw the buoy out there and we'll get you plugged in. The PowerShell add-in for VSCode is perfectly nice to work with. There'll come a time, if you're using PowerShell ISE, there'll come a time where you abandon that because Microsoft will force you to. They're going to force you to VSCode eventually because that's the future. So maybe just start taking your baby steps right now. So I've got another slide somewhere I clearly didn't get over here. I've got about 2 pages of resources for you, so look for those. Did we get done in time? We have 10 minutes to spare. Yeah, fire away.
The first link for the Git, the Pro Git,
yeah,
didn't work.
Oh, you're kidding me.
And I Googled it and I found edition 2, second edition, 2014.
Yeah?
Is that the right one?
Yeah, it's quite.
Okay.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, like I found.
Okay. I'm glad you said something. I've been passing that around. I check it about once a year. You said what website's it on?
Get-scm.com.
Get-scm.com. Thank you very much. Oh, okay, yeah, and this is exactly where you get the Git client. So I'll update the link in the final thing, but there's about 2 pages worth of resources that I need you to get. But absolutely do that. I hope that wasn't too painful. You guys are good sports about it anyway. We have time for some questions. Any questions, thoughts? And by the way, so VSCode is free. You can actually go get the community. If you're just doing coding on your own, you can actually go get the full version of Visual Studio on your own for free. It's Community Edition, it's called. So as long as you're not contributing to commercial software is the rule. And for Azure DevOps, if you're just building stuff that you're willing to share with the community, if it's open source, you can have Azure DevOps for free with a bunch of repos and release and build pipelines. So there's no reason you can't begin very, very free with all this. Even if you're doing it on-prem, even like in your own Hyper-V or VMware environment, if you're running your own build agents, absolutely get into this and go nuts. I'm glad you mentioned that. So Eric, the second Eric said light and it's clean, and you can run it on any operating system. So I'm going to tell you a story here. So I'm a Windows guy. I started out as a Windows guy. Some years ago, I looked at the code popularity, and I said, I think open source is starting to become a thing. I said, I'm going to go learn Python. Then I'm going to go learn Linux and Docker. It was in 2015. Docker drove me to get serious about it because Docker on Windows was a freaking nightmare. I had a presentation at a conference one night, and I updated Windows, and it broke everything. And my demo worked the next day because I pinged a German Docker captain at 11 p.m. my time, so he was awake, and said, "Can you please God compile me another Docker swarm agent so this works tomorrow?" And I woke up the next day, and he'd send an email, and I still remind him of how he saved my life that day. So what I did was Microsoft in a pretty recent version of Windows 10 created a quick start build of Ubuntu Linux. So you can do a couple of clicks, and you notice that I'm using RDP, right? So I basically did click next. I have Ubuntu 18.04 long-term branch, which is their stable branch. It has an RDP daemon running that runs perfectly at full screens. If I'm on 2 screens, I can actually run it on 2 screens. And as Eric said, here I'm running Visual Studio Code right here. And what I do is I'm writing code on Windows. If I want to write shell script, more often than not, I will just pop over here. I don't like to use the subsystem for Linux, and here's why. The default security and behavior of the subsystem for Linux over there I found is different in certain ways, like things that work here won't work over there. And I don't have time for nonsense. So I said, I bought a machine with a bunch of memory. I just run Linux. I run all the same tools here. I'm running Git. I'm running a Git client. I tend to use command line Git here because it's easier. But I use Visual Studio Code here. I use Visual Studio Code over there. And the biggest difference I have, you can't see it in small print. In the bottom, you'll see an LF, which is line feed. So your new line in Windows is CRLF, and in Linux, it's LF. So the biggest thing I have to do is actually go down here, and I might every now and again I'll get something in my Git repo that's line for Windows, and it's going to puke over here. So I'll just go hit this, and Linux actually pops it up there and says, "Oh, you want to switch this?" And so I can switch it on the fly right here. Yeah.
You can set it in Git.
Yep.
Local Git, you can say, when you download here, make the line use this way. When you upload all, I always do the extendings.
Yep.
And you say, basically have your line.
Yeah, so Eric just named one of 2 perfect strategies. So you can basically train your Git behavior so it automatically sets your line feeds right. That Git client from git-scm.com, that will actually prompt you and say, "Hey, you're downloading to an environment where the line feeds aren't going to work. Would you like me to change them?" And it will change them on the fly, whether you're coming to Linux or you're coming to Windows. What Eric is saying is probably a better way of doing it. So I'm too lazy to go do it right. I just let the Git client
that through like global variables or something? Global variables or, yeah.
Is that global settings somewhere? I haven't even thought of that.
It'll even walk you through it. It's like, it gives you 3 different options when you're doing the new install.
Yeah, and the other thing I do is.
Oh, when you've done this.
Where so I don't have to do that, but I can just have a lot of PowerShell.
Yeah,
And so when I do public notes,
yeah.
certain things you want in certain file format on that file.
Uh-huh.
So you can tell it the default way for your client, but you can also tell it repo. And I forget where there's a text file you get, you can say, get always override, always keep it this way. So you can
Right, yeah.
get more-
Things like global config or something.
Take my social media accounts down, connect with me on social media. If you do something cool, if you go away and actually use this in any way, tell me. It makes my week when I hear that somebody walks away from this and you do something. If you have questions, I'll always give you my best effort. Dumb looks are absolutely free, as are wrong answers. But yeah, in the context of if you got a 5-minute question here, they're just ping me anytime, by all means. And I hope you guys found it useful. I appreciate you sticking around with me so late. I know it's late. Yeah, my pleasure. Folks online, thank you for dialing in.